Hey, it's John Nemo. Welcome back to another episode. And I wanted to talk to you today about leverage. One of the key components that I've really seen change the game for me with sales is understanding how to position yourself on a call, how to create leverage, how to create authority, how to create credibility, not just before the prospect gets on Zoom or the phone with you, but even during the call itself. And so I want to explain that a little bit. There's really something I always come back to a good friend of mine, Paul Klein, who had a great online course and training called Pricing is Positioning, about pricing. And he always talked about the stench of desperation, right? It's like if you price yourself just ridiculously low, there's some desperation attached, right? And that's an authority builder and a credibility builder. There's something to be said, if and I've heard this, I can't remember if I was my business coach or someone else said it, but like, whoever has the lowest price is just leading the race to go out of business first, right? And there's such an advantage to being the highest priced person in your space, in your industry, as opposed to the lowest for obvious reasons. But there's also, when your prices are that insanely high, or relatively speaking, that piques curiosity, and people are like, why are you charging 10 times more than everyone else? What have you, what's inside your process that's so unique and different? How can you quote unquote get away with that? Why do people pay you those rates? And so you see this across every single industry on earth, right? Look at cars, right? The range in price from cars, hotels, homes, all these different things, experiences, vacations, right? Airplanes, like anything can be priced differently. And you really want to build that best in class kind of brand. And so what's interesting, to kind of go back to the leverage piece of it, pricing is one point of leverage. And the way that I price is I basically say, well, I cost more than all the other LinkedIn lead generation agencies. And the reason is it's all custom. It's all custom. And oh, by the way, I do the work personally. So you get me, the guy that wrote all the books, the guy that's been doing it since 2012, all that, jazz. I literally do it personally. I interview you for an hour. I personally rewrite your profile. I personally write you, 2,000 to 3,000 word ebook. By the way, I've written 8 books. I've spent 25 years as a journalist. I've won all these awards. I've been in the New York Times. So you're getting all that credibility that I have as a writer and an author and, creative. And so that's why my pricing is what it is. And people are like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a lot different than having someone with AI or a team overseas just write, copy and paste cookie cutter messages and whatever. So that's how you can kind of differentiate yourself with pricing, right? Is building a really strong brand to be like, well, think of it this way. The coaching industry, if I got Tony Robbins to personally coach me one-on-one, his rate is probably going to be more than a Tony Robbins certified coach who went through one of his programs, right? Or, Joe coach down the street. So because Tony Robbins has built such a powerful personal brand. And if you look at how Tony Robbins built his brand, yes, he's this charismatic speaker, but he's also written a bunch of best-selling books. He's constantly showing you associations of, oh, here he is, coaching a president. Here he is coaching a movie star. Here he is coaching a pro athlete. Like, that's done intentionally so that you look at Tony Robbins and go, yeah, I want the same guy coaching me that coached a US president or coached a, NBA star. So there's all these different ways to build brand and build association. The other big piece with leverage on the actual sales call is how you start it. Like, that's really, you set the tone right away. And it took me a long time to learn this because, again, depending on your mindset, which it all comes back to mindset, and your mindset is key with everything, is do you have an abundance mindset, or do you have like a scarcity mindset? Like, I need the money, I need the deal, whatever it takes, I'm just going to try to close this deal, right? If you come in with that mindset, that scarcity mindset of, I don't know if I'll get another lead or whatever, you're going to compromise. You're going to, you're going to let the prospect dictate everything. And you're going to end up typically with a bad client, not paying you what you're worth and being a real pain in your neck. And then it all goes bad. And so, I've had to get to this place where I say, okay, I do have leverage, right? I have leverage in the sense of, I do it all personally, so I can't scale myself. Like, I've had different iterations of Nemo Media Group where I have had a whole team of copywriters and a team of editors and a team of strategists. And I've done that for years, and got results and whatever. And I've kind of come back to a place where I like it smaller. I like the creative work. So I like doing the profile. I like writing the ebook. Again, as a journalist, as an author, I love that stuff. I just enjoy it. So Also, that enables me to charge higher prices, because if people come into my world through my books, through my videos, through my emails, through my content, they're like, wow, I get to hire the guy that literally wrote the book on LinkedIn lead generation to do my profile. Well, I'm sure that's not cheap, right? So again, you have that branding. So what I basically am able to say, I'm able to create leverage on that call. And even if you don't follow my exact method, you can still create leverage. Here's the simple thing is I basically start the call and I say, hey, it's great to meet you. Just so you know, this isn't like a typical quote unquote sales call. Like, the reason being, we don't take on every possible client we can work with. We do turn a lot of people away, which is true, by the way. And I say the reason being, I really win or lose based on client selection. And I've found over the years, very specifically, like I need to pick winning clients. I can't win with losers. And I really want to make sure, you'd be a good fit for us. Obviously, grill me as much as you want about our process and everything we do, but I'm also going to grill you. And I do it with humor, right? I laugh about it. I'm going to grill you too, because the reality is I've got to make sure you're a good fit for us, since I'm going to, especially, and then I add this in, especially since I work with you personally, I got to make sure that I enjoy you and we get along and that there's trust and all these things. And most people then are immediately like, oh, wait, because the call I had today, the person started with this. They started with, well, listen, I'm here to evaluate whether or not I want to work with you. I've worked with all these other agencies and they haven't done squat and da 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 da. And I could tell they were coming in like, I'm in, the captain, I'm the authority. And I said, well, let me just stop you there. And then I just said what I just, did earlier on the podcast. Like, I don't work with everyone. Like, so don't worry. Like, I'm not going to necessarily take you on just because you want to work with me anyway. I have to grill you as much as you grill me. And so I started with like, what are the other agencies doing? Is what I'm doing enough, right? Different enough. And so basically what I did to the person, and this is something I've learned to do before the call, I make these done for you videos. So I make a video of our whole done for you process. I use Loom, LOOM.com. It's the best screen recording tool I've come across. And I basically make a screen recording. I say, hey, it's John Nemo. It's great to hear you're interested in our done for you services. And then I niche it. So it's like, if you're a franchise consultant, here's a video for you with a franchise consultant example. If you're a small business owner, here's a video with a small business owner example. If you're a coach, here's a coach example. If you're a consultant, here's a consultant example, right? And what I do is I take a current client or whatever, and I walk through A to Z, the done for you process. So here's an example of Bob. He's our franchise consultant client. Here's how the process worked with Bob. Here's what we did with his profile. Here's the strategy behind it. Here's the finished product. Next for Bob, we wrote a custom ebook. Here's what it looks like, finished and written. Here's what the text looks like. And then I do this and this and this and walk through the whole process. So they see everything. So by the time they get on the call, they're like, they can know, oh, and that's what this guy said. He goes, yeah, I watched your video a few times. It's definitely very different than what other LinkedIn agencies did. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm intrigued, because it looks a lot different. And I listened to him kind of sell himself then. He's like, because what you're doing, and he just repeated what I would have said, everything you're doing is so custom and everything is so personalized. And that's so different than people that do cookie cutter and copy and paste. And everything you're doing, I get to work with you personally as opposed to farming me off to a team overseas and not getting response. And I get the expert doing it and not some other. I'm like, exactly. Like, you want to be on my sales team? You're doing great, and that's where that leverage comes in. So they kind of are selling themselves on your process because you're saying to them, it honestly, it goes back to junior high. Like, when you liked a girl, you had to pretend you didn't like her to get the girl interested in you. Or if you liked a boy, you had to pretend you didn't like him, but you had to whatever, flirt with him just enough to get him to, it's like chasing, right? Like, we're interested in what we can't have. Or if you tell someone no, they say why, right? And they want to know why would you reject me? Why don't you want me? I'm attractive. Here, look at me as a client. Like, wouldn't you want to work with me? And that's the basic psychology behind this leverage point is like, well, I'm not going to work with just anyone. I'm not in a place where just because you can afford it, I'm going to take your cert. Like, you got to fit these criteria and meet these needs. And, I said recently on this call with a prospect, like, and there's some red flags with you, just being totally honest with you. And they're like, what? And I was like, this is a red flag. This is a red flag. This is a red flag. And to their credit, they were very self-aware and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I see that. Yeah, I need to clean that up. And absolutely, I'm just trying to convey my experiences in the past. I'm not saying you're going to be that way, right? Now, because I said to them, like, one of the red flags I have with people is they want to micromanage it, right? Like, either you hire me and trust me to do the job, or you are going to just throw monkey wrenches and everything. It's like, if I hired you to write a book and then I rewrote every page, what's the point of hiring an author, right? And they're like, yeah, I get it. Well, I had bad experiences with these other guys. I'm like, well, I'm not them. And I don't want to take the punishment for their mistakes. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. I get it. So that was where you can kind of say to them, like, listen, you got to qualify yourself to work with me. And there's such an appeal to that, because that person then pivoted into, at the end of the call, going, well, I'm really sold on working with you, John. I'm not sure if you're sold yet on working with me. And I was like, boom, okay, here we go. Like, that's what I wanted to hear, because then I can say, okay, well, I really appreciate that. I'm really glad that you see that we can help you. Yeah, you know what? You've kind of explained it to me. And the question I always like to use at that point is I'll basically say, well, as I said earlier, I win or lose based on client selection. So I would love to hear you answer this question for me. Why would you be a great client for me? Why would our agency love you? And then I want to see what they say, right? And they'll have all kinds of different responses. But again, I'm looking for them to kind of psychologically say, well, wait a minute, why wouldn't you want to work with me? I'm great. I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. I pay my bills on time. I don't second guess. I'm not going to micromanage you. I can bring you other business because I'm going to do this and this. And I'm going to be the most attentive client you've ever had. And whatever you tell me, I'm going to do. And I'm willing to go above and beyond. And then you're like, okay. And then what I'll say to them is, awesome. Like, you've sold me on you as a client. All right, great. I'm willing to work with you. And then I laugh, right? Because of course they're going to pay me. So it's like, okay. And then we can get into like the closing part of the call. And so it's just such a great illustration as I go through each of these calls to remember building in leverage points at different parts of your kind of sales funnel process. In the beginning of your sales funnel, with your content, with your free tips, with your ebooks, your webinars, your videos, your podcasts, build in that credibility, build in that authority, not just in the tips that you share, but in what you associate with or who you associate with. And I think of Tony Robbins because every time I see that guy, he's talking to some celebrity, he's coaching Oprah, he's talking to a president, and you're going, your cave person brain goes, oh, well, if Oprah uses him, he must be good, right? And that's where on the front top banner of NemoMediaGroup.com, you're going to see New York Times, Inc. magazine, featured in LinkedIn. I can't remember where else, but like those are legitimate places that I've been featured or talked about or interviewed for or written blogs for. You can click on them and read articles I've written. That in a prospect's mind goes, oh, wow, well, if the New York Times interviewed him about LinkedIn lead generation, they're the New York Times, like they're a big important newspaper, right? He should know what he's doing. Or if he's got testimonials, right? You can look at my testimonials and it's a combination of people getting tangible results. I made 6 figures in sales, whatever. But there's also like celebrity type, business people there that I rewrote profiles for that will endorse me and say things about me that people in my audience are going to know and go, oh, wow, if he personally did the profile for that person, he must know what he's doing. They wouldn't trust just anyone with their brand. So those are things you can build in at the front end as far as like your website, your testimonials, your content, photos that you publish. So honored to have a chance to, work on the website for this big company that everyone knows, right? Like, it's humble brags, but it's also saying, yeah, I'm a big deal. I work with some really top-notch people. And then as you get into the call, that's where you really want to structure those live interactions, basically being like, hey, you know what? Just to make the best use of our time, like just to kind of set the expectation, like we don't take on anyone or everyone. Like we got to make sure it's a good mutual fit. The price isn't even the issue. Even if people can afford us, we might say no. So I really want to just have you be put at ease that, listen, it has to be a mutual fit. As much as you want to interview me and make sure we're a good fit for you, I want to do the same for you. And the reason being, we only want to take on clients that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt we can have success with. There are certain markers, there are certain things we've seen that in, prospects that become clients that can kind of help guarantee a great outcome. And then the person's going to be intrigued and they're going to want to know, well, do I have those checks? Do I have those things in my bag? And if not, I'll go get them, and then they want to work with you. And so a great example, this is a great leverage point that I'll use that I just came up with recently, thankfully, was I had a franchise consultant on and they said, okay, well, you've had all this success with franchise consultants and there's testimonials we have on our website of that niche of people doing really well. And he said, he had a great question. He goes, if you're so great, why isn't every franchise consultant on earth working with you? And why don't you have, hundreds of testimonials? And I said, you want to know the truth? I said, because some franchise consultants can't close leads. And he's like, oh, okay, that's fair. And I'm like, listen, I said, I'll give you two examples. We have, I won't use their real names, but I said we have Bill. He's our first franchise consultant. In the last 6 months, from the leads I generated for him on LinkedIn, and this is true, and I'll give you his real name if you want, if you're serious, he has closed $452,000 in business from us in the last 6 months. He's probably, I don't even know what his ROI is off us because he's not paying a whole lot. So, which is a great win, right? I mean, he's killing it. And I said, I have another consultant, Joe, who has made zero from us. And I said, exact same program. They both went through a 6-month done for you LinkedIn lead generation program. I personally rewrote their profiles. I personally wrote them each an ebook. I personally did their strategy. I personally wrote messages. You know, my team and I personally targeted the exact right niches. And by the way, we generated roughly the same amount of calls for Bill and Joe. Bill closed 452 grand of those prospects. Joe closed zero of them. I said, so at the end of the day, it's not really about can I deliver, it's about can you deliver? And that's that leverage point to push it back to the prospect. Like, listen, in my situation, I'm doing lead generation. I'm not closing for you. I'm not selling for you. If I generate these leads for you, can you actually close them? Or will you be someone that isn't good at it, blames someone else, says, you know, does the Glengarry, Glen Ross, no, the leads are weak. These are bad leads. I'm like, they're the same leads, man. They're the same leads across the board for all the consultants, all the franchise consultants. The ones that are good, that have a good back end, that know how to move a person through the process, that are great at, you know, conversation and communication and whatever, they're killing it. Like, you know, that guy, Bill, is our best one. He's done 452 grand. Other people have done 100 grand, you know, 3 multi-unit deals, whatever that is, you know. So it just depends on you, right? And there's other consultants that will talk a good game, but they can't close. They don't have a good back end. They don't follow up with the leads. Like, we gave you their name and number and said, text them. They want to talk to you right away today. Call them, and they don't call, or they don't respond. And it's like, you know, that's where I look for. And that's, I say, so which one are you? Right. And of course you want them to say, well, I'm like Bill, I'm going to close everything in sight. And then you say, okay, well, if that's the case, then this should be a no-brainer, because 1 sale for you or 2 sales for you in 6 months would double your investment with me, you know. And then that's where you see if they're really the legit person, because then they're like, yeah, okay, this is a no-brainer, let's roll. Or they're like, well, you know, like I had one say to me, well, this is still a huge gamble. And I was like, well, the reality is, and I did the math for him. I said, I said, first off, all marketing and lead generation is a gamble. Like, you can put a billboard up and have the best artwork ever. You know, Da Vinci could do the artwork, right? You get to prove it all. We could know that we've counted the amount of cars that drive that billboard every day, and they come from these affluent neighborhoods, and they all have these jobs based on where they live. I said, but there's no guarantee that anyone's going to call the phone number on the billboard or visit the website. Like, there's no guarantee, right, that we can have our best educated guess, but it's still a risk, right? At the end of the day, though, the billboard company doesn't give you your money back, right? If it didn't work, or if you didn't get enough calls, or if you didn't close the calls, it's, you know, the billboard company's gonna be like, listen, man, that was an educated gamble for both of us. Now, what I say in that case to this person is, so if you invest X with us for a 6-month project, we're going to reach out to, you know, about 300 people a day on LinkedIn, one-on-one. Over 6 months, that's 54,000 of your ideal prospects that we are personally going to reach out to and talk to one-on-one, qualify them, warm them up, put them through content, have them read a 3,000-word ebook about you, make sure that they're interested in the topic, they've read a book about you, and they want to learn more about franchise ownership. So it's a very qualified lead. By the way, it's an exclusive lead. I'm not selling these leads to other people. They're your leads, they're your babies. You get them forever. You get all this branding, all this high-end content, new profile, ebook, whatever. So you are getting deliverables, you know. But even if you just want to break it down to money in, money out, I'm like, if I reach out to 54,000 people, you literally need to convert 1 sale to pay for my whole program, right? Or 2 sales, whatever it might be. I don't depend on the pricing. And I say, so if we do the math, out of 1 sale out of 54,000 people is 0.002%. So I'm like, let's, you know, look at my track record, look at what I've done. You know, if you're getting, can you close at a 0.002% rate? You know, like, then come on. And what it really does is, when you get all that logic out of the way, logic can be leverage, you still have to deal with the emotional piece, right? And sometimes I think in the case of this prospect, they still have the fear. Like, this is the most I've ever spent. I'm not comfortable with this. I don't have a track record with this. And what I basically said was, well, you're telling me, like, you go back to what they already told you on the call. You're telling me you want to scale and you want to be like Bill, who did 450 grand, and you're just as good as him. You just don't have the leads. Well, if you play small, you're going to stay small. Like, I don't play small. I play big. I do everything custom, and all the reason my pricing is what it is. So do you want to play big or play small? And that's where they have to decide, to bet on themselves. And oftentimes that's the bigger objection, is they don't believe in themselves. And that's what's hard sitting in the sales chair, is you don't really know that sometimes. You can't really look into their brain, but you have to keep kind of not picking away, but keep kind of poking and prodding to get to the real issue, right? And setting up the call to the point where it's like, well, you said, logically this should make sense. So what's the real issue? Have you made a bad investment in the past? Do you not trust yourself? Whatever. And then oftentimes you can get there, but sometimes you can't, and that's okay. But again, leverage is everything on these calls. So hopefully you found that helpful. I could rant and rant and rant all day. I love this stuff, but hopefully you find that helpful. Create that leverage early in your funnel, create that credibility, and then try to set the tone on your next call. Try to say, like, hey, just so you know, like, I'm really glad we're connecting. I'm pretty picky about who I choose to work with for the following reasons. So I'm going to, don't take it wrong, but like, I'm going to grill you as much as you grill me. And the reason being, I want to make sure, we could have success helping you. There's a lot of variables that go into the people that have success with us. I just need to kind of go down that checklist with you. And if you seem to check those boxes, then, it's probably a good fit for us to work with you. And obviously, likewise, you need to do that with me. When you set that tone, you're more kind of co-collaborators, and they feel like they almost have to sell you, as opposed to just you being there and they just get to kind of be the king up on the throne and tell you all the ways that you have to convince them and beg them to work with them. And you don't want that, right? So anyway, hope that helps you. Use some leverage on your next call. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon on another episode.